Well, after weeks of a lot of bad news for the Boris Johnson's government and the Brexit side, we finally heard some good news this morning and a small, very small victory for Boris. Earlier today, the High Court ruled in favour of Boris Johnson that there is no legal requirement to force him to get a Brexit extension. Prime Minister triumphs in new court case over no-deal Brexit delay row. And this was the reaction from the chief Remainer, Julian Mohan. In short, we've lost. Now, basically what happened was this morning, the Scottish court obviously had a case, Remainers presented a new case to make sure that Boris Johnson is forced to ask for a delay. Now, what the court said is that there's no legal requirement because last week, Geoffrey Cox and Boris Johnson essentially promised that we will in fact send a letter to seek an extension. They didn't actually say we will accept the delay, but they said we will, don't worry, we promise we'll send a letter. So that's why the court basically said, well, they've already promised, so we can't really do anything about it. There's no legal basis to make sure he actually does the job. Now, this shows that last week's move by Boris Johnson was either genius or just lucky. Nevertheless, this is basically a good start, but it's not the end because there is still the whole Ben Act is still there, the Surrender Act is still there, and the government have to find a way to get around it somehow. But at least they didn't pass this against the government. If this court had ruled against Boris Johnson, then that would have been over. Then that meant they would have ensured that Boris should be forced and we would have gotten that extension anyway. Now, this is coming at a time when Boris Johnson himself is going to be seeking a ruling from the Supreme Court on no-deal Brexit. Boris Johnson is prepared to launch a legal action in his attempts to ensure that Britain can leave the European Union this month with no deal. Several government sources have told the Daily Telegraph that the Prime Minister is willing to go to the Supreme Court in an effort to avoid having to write a letter asking for a delay to Brexit, as set out in the Ben Act. It raises the possibility that Mr. Johnson could give evidence in the court case in an attempt to persuade judges in person against forcing him to ask the EU for a Brexit delay. A senior government source said that it was vital that Mr. Johnson was forced to write the letter delaying Brexit rather than agreeing to do so voluntarily. Now, this might not be necessary anymore because the High Court ruled in favour of Boris Johnson, but they still have that option if somehow something comes up again, because the Remainers are now doing an appeal again against the High Court's ruling. But what else has been happening with the whole Brexit saga? So yesterday, the European Union essentially rejected the initial proposals that came from Boris Johnson to compromise on a new Brexit deal. Brexit talks postponed in blow to Boris Johnson's proposals. Negotiations were expected to continue over the weekend as Mr. Johnson tries to sell his fresh Brexit plan to Brussels. The European Union have said that the discussions on the Prime Minister's plan to replace the Irish backstop would not take place this weekend, which was yesterday, but that the UK would be given another opportunity to present its proposals in detail on Monday. Now, earlier on, Michel Barnier came out and said that the EU would give the government the final answer on the new Brexit proposals. Boris Johnson's new proposals are very, very much against the EU's interests. He's clarified that, for example, fisheries and the waters will be completely free. It will belong to the UK, and the EU will not have any say in that. We won't be in the customs union, or we won't be under the rule of the ECJ. And especially when it comes to the Irish backstop, there are a lot of issues that the EU have. But Boris Johnson is not waiting for that. He's already sending signals. He's written in an article today that we are packing our bags. Will you cheerily wave us off or not? This is a message he sent to the European Union. Boris Johnson has said that we will be packing our bags and walking out on the 31st of October. The only question is whether Brussels cheerily waves us off with a mutually agreeable deal, or whether we will be forced to head off on our own. Boris Johnson has said that the proposals put to Brussels would get rid of the anti-democratic backstop, avoid infrastructure or checks at the Irish border, respect the Northern Ireland peace process and the Good Friday Agreement, and give farmers and businesses the assurances they need. The proposals would also get the UK out of the EU and its customs union, allowing us to take back control of our trade policy and do free trade deals with our friends around the world. Now, what's interesting is that he's still insisting that we will be leaving with or without a deal. So he better delivers, otherwise he and the Tory party will be in a lot of trouble. Meanwhile, the Labour Party have now put up a candidate in Boris Johnson's seat to essentially challenge him in the next election. And yeah, let's find out more about this guy. Ali Milani, he's the Labour candidate for Oxbridge and South Ruislip, who's hoping to make history. Never in British history has an incumbent Prime Minister lost their seat in an election. Iranian-born Milani, who came to the UK aged 4 and grew up on a nearby council estate, admits that when he was first elected to take on Boris Johnson, he was aiming to merely change the conversation rather than actually win the seat. Yeah, my advice is to go back to your original aim, because you're not going to win. Historically speaking, when an MP has become a Prime Minister, they have always increased their share of votes, because local constituents, regardless of what party they usually vote for, they basically like their MP to be Prime Minister, because that means they have more influence in terms of what's happening in Parliament and in the country in general. Boris Johnson's seat is actually fine. Yeah, he might have reduced his votes back in 2017, but that's thanks to Theresa May. He's not going to go lower than that. It's almost impossible. So yeah, good luck with that. Also, this proves that not all Iranians are sound like me. Ali Milani? Really? Okay. But going back to Boris Johnson and the plans that he could have, the options that he could have, we've also been hearing some interesting stuff about the potential partnership between him and Nigel Farage. Boris Johnson to sabotage the EU if forced to delay Brexit. It is understood that plans under discussion include blocking the EU's 2021 to 27 budget, which is due to be agreed early next year, and nominating a British commissioner who would cause disruption within their portfolio. Senior ministers have discussed the prospects of sending Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit party, to take up the role. Now, the Boris Johnson government are essentially using this as a massive bluff to send a huge warning to the EU, because if you don't give us the no deal Brexit, if you give us a delay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to ruin your budget. We're going to send Nigel Farage to annoy you every single day, and we'll just be there as a disruptive member, and we're not going to pay a membership fee, so you're going to have to be kicking us out anyway. So I wonder how this bluff will go down in Brussels, but at least it's an effort, so well done. The Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, has also sent a massive warning to the EU that this government won't back down on Brexit. Barclay has said that my message to the EU and the anti-Brexit opposition MPs is this: we are not backing down. This government will never betray the will of the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU. The British public wants to move on. Parliament needs to move on. Our country deserves to come together and move on. And frankly, the EU itself wants to move on. Let's get Brexit done so we can focus on the priorities that people care about: our schools, our police, and our NHS. We don't need more time. We need to deliver Brexit. Now, on the plus side, the Conservative governments are making a lot of effort, and they're doing all they can to make sure that we do leave at the end of October. And this is why there's been a lot of surveys and polls where people were being asked, in a scenario where if we don't leave the EU but it's not Boris's fault, would you still support him? And they've said yes. As I said last night, I personally would struggle to defend his line that we'll be leaving do or die, come what may, but I won't be able to actually blame him because he's doing all he can. There's also been discussions about potentially suspending Parliament again towards the end of October, and there is a group of campaigners who might actually help Boris Johnson to make this happen. And they are the Extinction Rebellion. They have started their campaigns literally from today, and they're going to go for 2 weeks. One of their plans is to basically close down Parliament. And Boris Johnson says, I'm in. Now, we're going to be covering the whole Extinction Rebellion's bizarre movement over the next few days. So make sure you tune in and subscribe to the channel so you actually could keep up with the videos. I think we have to address a few things. There's been a trend in the comment sections where a lot of people have been criticizing me. If I'm optimistic, they say you're too optimistic. If I'm not, if I'm criticizing the government, they say, are you losing hope? Or apparently I'm selling out for some reason. Whenever the Boris's government mess up, apparently it's my fault. For the record, I do not work for the Boris Johnson government. I don't work for the Conservative Party. I'm merely reporting what's been sent in the news that's misleading. I try to correct it by analysing it and try to basically report things that are not being mentioned in the news. That's my job. If the government mess up, it's not my fault, and I can't be a sellout because I'm not actually in charge of the Brexit negotiations, for the record. And this goes to a comment that was made on the channel by a fellow Brexiteer who wants a no-deal Brexit. Apparently because I said things are getting exciting as we're getting closer, and as Boris has said, we are still leaving. She wasn't too happy about that. She said, "Why do you find the trashing of our constitution and of our democracy exciting? Do you really see it as a golden opportunity to flog t-shirts and coffee mugs? Has it not occurred to you that all of this suggests that you have no genuine emotional or spiritual commitment to Brexit, and that you interpret our national agony as just a springboard for self-promotion?" Now, just to clarify, I've spent the last 10 years of my life fighting for freedom and democracy, and I've lost a lot of personal things because of it. And the reason that I'm still optimistic, I'm a rational person. As things stand now, we are still leaving at the end of October. If facts change, and if that just doesn't happen, then of course my line will change too, and I'll be out on the streets with everyone else, like everyone else. Now, I'm not, as I said, because I'm rational, I'm not going to be changing my mind every 5 minutes or changing my emotions every 5 minutes. We can all get emotional, but sometimes we have to control it because, yes, things are constantly changing in the news, but none of them are actually changing the course of Brexit. The only obstacle, as I said, is still the Ben Act, the Surrender Act. Everything else that's been happening around it is irrelevant. None of the, including cancellation or prorogation of Parliament, didn't change anything. None of this changed anything. But because news comes out every 5 minutes and people get angry, it doesn't mean that we have to lose hope. I'm just going with rationality. On paper, as things stand, there is still a way that the government could leave without a deal end of October. But as I said, if we don't leave, especially if it's the fault of the government itself, then obviously I'll be out there criticising and campaigning and won't stop until we leave the EU. Just to clarify. And on the point of the t-shirts and coffee mugs, I've only started doing this because a lot of the supporters in the comment section have constantly been asking for Brexit t-shirts and other merchandise because they couldn't find the relevant ones online. So I created a merchandise page where I get my ideas from you guys. You tell me what design you want for a t-shirt and I basically make it happen. And it's not really my fault, I'm just giving the people what they want. And all the money that's been generated is actually going back to the channel to make sure that we keep informing people and raising awareness and making these videos. Otherwise I won't be able to do it. On that note, as we said, one of the biggest demands that you guys have had for a design for a t-shirt is no deal, no problem. This is now live in the shop. Also mugs and everything else, no deal, no problem. So if you want to check it out, the link is in the description. As always, you could find other designs as well, and as I've said before, if you want to send me a message with any particular customized design for a t-shirt, just let me know and I'll try to make that happen. If you want to follow me on social media, read my rants on Twitter, or watch the behind the scenes of these videos on Instagram, you can find them down here. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, click on the notification bell next to it, and otherwise you won't be notified when I release a new video. Videos come out every day 5:45 p.m. And later on today at 8 p.m. we have another video coming out. Tomorrow's video is going to be focusing on Jo Swinson and her husband and the links to the European Union funding, but also going to be focusing on Extinction Rebellion. So make sure you tune in then. I'm Tousi, and this is the fastest growing conservative Brexit channel in the country.